Grannies in Trouble: The Housing Crisis Among Over 60 Women, Episode 154B. I am Rod Murphy, and this is Growing Up Poor in Irish Boston, a series of my 1950s era Irish book, Irish Boston songs, history, jokes, and stories. And never let the truth interfere with a good story. After my wonderful wife Jean died, and after 6 months of my grieving, I began to miss the company of a woman. So I tried dating sites, but I was not ready to form a relationship then. I met many over 60 women, and among other things that I learned was how unprepared for old age many of those women were. Not all, of course, but at least 50% of the women that I met were woefully unprepared. So yes, grannies in trouble, and in particular in Boston, because of the high cost, especially of housing. There are reasons why those mature women were financially unprepared. In order for anyone to save and invest money for old age and also to contribute enough to Social Security or a pension, one needs a yearly income above the subsistence level. If she gets divorced or if she becomes a widow, that could result in a barely subsistence income. Why? Despite what the crazy feminists spout, men and women are very different. Most women are dependent, at least partially, throughout their lives on their usually higher income husbands. Plus, women naturally need to spend more time tending to children and to the family's household duties. That ends up keeping them from earning enough income to sock away for retirement and also limits their Social Security credit later. On average, women live about 5 years longer than men. That means they rely on Social Security for a longer period, exacerbating the problem. Also, many women need to take Social Security earlier, and that reduces her monthly benefit. It's possible to claim benefits as early as age 62. However, every year you wait increases your monthly payment by 8% per year, maxing out at age 70. Given women's longer life expectancy, patience, if possible, pays off. Boston has many neighborhoods, like the South End, Hyde Park, East Boston, Dorchester, Roxbury, South Boston, Back Bay, Beacon Hill, South Bay, Mattapan, Roslindale, West Roxbury, and downtown. Picking the North End neighborhood to demonstrate how urban neighborhoods transition and how rents increase when the demographics change. Hanover and Salem Streets were the heart of the North End, but the number of young, upwardly mobile professionals moving into the North End has changed what was for decades a predominantly Italian-American enclave. Brick apartment buildings and three-deckers make up the housing stock there. St. Leonard's Church, the Ischia Grocery, Mike's Cannolis, and the many great Italian restaurants are all on Hanover Street. Many North End residents continue to speak Italian in this neighborhood. Before World War II, 90% of the North End's residents were of Italian ancestry. By 1970, the figure had slipped to 60%. In the 1980 census, it was 50%. The buildings in the North End are 100 years old or more, in poor condition, and formerly did not have central heating. A few years earlier, you couldn't get more than 15 grand for a three-decker there. But in the late 1970s, Boston's economy revived. It became fashionable to live in the inner city again. Young people from the suburbs discovered the North End. They started to buy the ramshackle brick buildings for $100,000 and up. This gentrification increased rents, which drove out many of the Italian residents. The residence owners happily snapped up the offers and headed to the suburbs themselves. The North End's transformation is not a new process. It is the oldest continuously settled area in North America. It was here that Reverend William Blackstone, the first inhabitant of Boston, made his home. And it was there that the Puritans under John Winthrop began their colony. Paul Revere lived here. It was in the steeple of the Old North Church there that the lanterns were lit to signal him about the movement of the British troops to Lexington and Concord. In the early 19th century, the North End declined as newer areas of the city were opened up, and it became a tenement area for Irish immigrants. John F. Kennedy's grandfather, Honey Fitzgerald, was born in the North End. The Irish retreated in the 1890s as Italian immigrants arrived. Today, however, you see men and women dressed in business suits and carrying leather briefcases, walking out of their old brick houses on their way to Boston's nearby financial district. The draw for the new residents is the ethnic charm, the little butcher shops, the religious feasts, and the old Neapolitan and Roman-looking men standing on the street corners. This gentrification is occurring elsewhere in other Boston neighborhoods, too. That phenomenon has caused a major economic revival in the recent years. But nowhere is the process more dramatic and sometimes more incongruous than in the North End, an area not more than a mile square, sandwiched between the waterfront and the formerly elevated central artery, which divided it from the rest of the city. With the aging of the baby boomers, Massachusetts is growing older. The senior population is expected to increase 35% over the next 2 decades. The high cost of housing and the lack of affordable options has many negative consequences that affect the whole state. Housing costs are a major contributor to the state's notoriously high cost of living and eclipses even high taxes as a major disincentive to firms and talented workers thinking of locating here. Paying an excessive amount of housing costs means older women have less money to spend on other essentials like food or health care and spend less money at the local businesses. Finally, high housing costs, especially in and near urban areas, have caused residents to search farther afield into the sprawling frontier past I-495. Why do rents in Massachusetts and in particular in Boston increase so dramatically? And more generally, why is today's dollar so weak compared to earlier years? The cause is obvious. It is our lawmakers and our presidents. For generations, both parties have been buying votes by passing giveaway programs that bust their budgets. So then they are forced to print more dollars to make up for the profligate spending, thereby diluting all Americans' dollars and causing all costs to increase. President Joe Biden all by himself caused 9% in dollar inflation, according to records. Why do our political leaders continue to do this is explained by the following so-called Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity, unquote. Let me describe a simple example of dollar dilution. If 10 people have a total savings account of $1,000, that means that each person equally owns 10% of that $1,000, or each one owns $100. Now, if another person is added to the group by legislation, the formula needs to change to $1,000 divided by 11, which is $90.90 for each person. That is dilution. When I bought my first home back in the Bronze Age, the price was about twice my annual income. Today, the cost of a house is 5 or 6 times the average citizen's income. Housing sales prices translate into higher monthly rents, of course. There is another large additional problem statewide for low-income women also. An example is my mill town of 18,000 people, Southbridge. There is a controversy regarding entrepreneurs buying up low-income subsidized housing such as public housing, Section 8 properties, or other developments. Massachusetts faces a severe housing affordability crisis with high demand for affordable units and with long waiting lists and ongoing efforts to preserve and produce that housing. Some of this entrepreneurial activity revolves around subsidized or low-income housing, as I said. There are lots of internet comments about this Southbridge problem. One of those online comments is about Southbridge's elderly housing being bought by business people and the new owners raising rents substantially. This is an almost verbatim online quote from someone about this subject. Quote, "After a lifetime of work, no one should be forced out of their home because the rent went up overnight. A corporate landlord raised rents by up to 70% at an elderly housing complex in Southbridge, Mass. Seniors in their 80s, 90s, and even 102 years old are being forced to decide whether they can afford to stay housed. This is happening right now, and it's completely legal under our current system. The real crisis is a housing system that allows massive rent hikes overnight with no protection for elders, working families, or people on fixed incomes," unquote. That was a quote. I agree that there is a housing crisis in Massachusetts and also here in Southbridge for low-income folks, especially the elderly. But is there a solution? I don't think so. What I'm going to say now might be considered harsh, but whether it is or it isn't, it is reality. Those who have not prepared themselves financially for old age have put themselves in jeopardy of being homeless in their old age. People are living longer, and that makes the possibility unlikely that there could be a government program that could ameliorate that elderly housing financial deficit. Today's taxpayers are already overtaxed and will rebel if that huge amount of housing aid is put on them as new taxes. So unless our corrupt politicians come up with another further inflationary program, I see no solution for some low-income folks getting evicted into the street. So yes, Granny is in big doo-doo. This is Rod Murphy. Thank you for viewing or listening to my YouTube and podcast episodes. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed them, please hit the subscribe button. It does not cost you anything, and it helps me to grow my audience. Again, my thanks.